can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our returning guest, former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. I hope you're having a blessed day, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Rashid. I'm pleased to be back with you.
Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on Trump's first 10 months in office, and is he living up to his promises?
Well, I, like most people, was very pleased that he quickly pardoned those wrongly convicted January the 6th protesters. And I was very pleased that he brought an end to the DEI policies, which are unconstitutional because they treat white people as second-class citizens in university admissions, employment promotion, and in the military. So he restored very damaged principles of the Constitution that had occurred under Democrats. And I thought that was a tremendous achievement. On the other hand, I think he's shown that he really is in the hands of Israel. And in some sense, Israel is taking precedent over our own problems that need his attention. So whereas he delivered two victories for America and for the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, he sort of wandered off now in serving Israel. We saw his acquiescence to Netanyahu's pressure to attack Iran. I mean, that's an act of war. And Iran was doing anything to us. We did it for Israel. So I thought that was a very bad development. And we've seen in his recent behavior that he more and more is concerned with Israel. We watched him fund the genocide in Gaza. We watched him engineer all the fake peace deals. All of them are fake. And we are expecting another attack by the United States on Iran. We've seen in his handling of the West's conflict with Russia. I mean, Ukraine is the proxy for this conflict. No real effort to come to terms with what the Russians say are the basic cause of the problem. He seems to think that this issue can be solved without addressing the Russian concerns. And he's never shown any inclination to understand what the Russian terms are. So we now have more money going to Ukraine to continue this conflict from us, and also the Europeans are or on the verge, it seems, of confiscating or using the money that were confiscated from Russian central bank assets to transfer it to Ukraine to continue the war. And Trump is talking about sending Patriot Tomahawk missiles and about Ukraine going on the offensive. So it looks like the failure to take this Russian position in any serious way, which would allow the end of a conflict based on a mutual security arrangement between Putin and the West. That seems to be failing. And it seems that there's not any obstacle other than Iran's surrender to further attacks. So when you look at it like this, it seems like he delivered up two things that he thought were really important to his supporters, and now he's wandered off the agenda. And it looks to me like the war is widening. The war with Russia is widening, especially if they send those long-range Tomahawks, assuming we have any to send. I mean, it could just be more of Trump's bluster and talk. But it's not a helpful talk if you're trying to get the confidence of the Russians to to come to some sort of general terms that normalize the relations, not just end a conflict, but to end the situation that produces the conflicts. It doesn't seem to be any real effort on the part of the administration to do that. We've seen lately statements both by the NATO Secretary General just the other day and Trump just the other day that sort of demean Russian military capability. They were both speaking as if Russia is some kind of a pussycat that is no real military capability, and therefore they'll have to do as we decide. This is this is so unreal. It's such a misreading of Putin's efforts to avoid a wider conflict. They see efforts to avoid conflict, to not acknowledge provocations in the interest of peace. They see that as Russian weakness, as a military incapability. And so they're pushing harder. So this is a fundamental error. It's a fundamental mistake. So it's a mixed record. I think he can be given also some credit for closing the border and now trying to deport some of the people who've come in illegally. Actually, I think I'd rather have the immigrant invaders than the white liberals. I'd be prepared for him to deport the governors and legislators and mayors of all the blue cities and keep the immigrant invaders. I think we'd have a better class of people. But it can't be a country if it doesn't have borders. And there can't be any sort of unity if you get overwhelmed with such large numbers of people who are not of your cultural background, your racial background, because they come in and form separate communities. There can't be unity. We become a Tower of Babel. So I think he can be given credit for trying to address this problem. You know, very funny things have come out. We found out that the superintendent of schools in one state was an illegal, and he was registered to vote. And I mean, how does this happen? And we found out the other day that Oregon, the state of Oregon, spends more money on free medical care for illegals than it does on the state police. So, uh, what the Democrats did, they gave the right to illegals to enter the country and be supported at the expense of citizens' property rights, because taxation is a violation of your property rights, because it takes some of your labor, your earnings, and redistributes it elsewhere. And so in Oregon, they're redistributing citizens' income to illegals. Well, what then does citizenship mean? A country in which citizenship doesn't mean anything is not a country. So these things, they have to be addressed. But I think the foreign policy for Trump is a failure. I'd have to give him an F. And I think his kowtowing to Israel raises the question, really, who is the president of the United States? Is it Trump or Netanyahu? And so that's my assessment, Rashid.
And this is what the War Secretary had to say. This is a quote from an article on October the 15th. And the article reads like this: U.S. War Secretary threatens Russia. Washington will impose costs on Moscow if the Ukraine conflict isn't settled, Pete Hegseth has said. The U.S. War Department stands ready to do its part and impose costs on Russia over the Ukraine conflict, War Secretary Pete Hegseth has said. Speaking in Brussels, Belgium, on Wednesday ahead of a meeting of countries coordinating military support for Ukraine, he lauded NATO members' recent militarization push. If this war does not end, if there is no path to peace in the short term, then the United States, along with its allies, will take the steps necessary to impose costs on Russia. Now, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, he is speaking, he is trying to project himself from a position of strength, but we know that America is not in a position of strength vis-a-vis Russia, especially on the European continent, militarily. Now, knowing that, why do you think the United States is trying to talk to Russia as if it is some third-tier power, or and does not have the military means to defend itself?
Well, because I think Putin has given them that impression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see, this war, which has been limited to a very small area, Donbass, it's been going on 4 years. And over the course of the 4 years, every Russian red line declared by Putin has been violated and not enforced. We have even seen the response by the Kremlin to the attack on their strategic bombing fleet. To avoid having to respond as the law requires, Putin said, oh, it wasn't an act of war, it was an act of terrorism. So he refused even to acknowledge the attack on the strategic bombing force. It's not an act of war. And so what happened yesterday was the Russian Foreign Ministry said, well, if they fire Tomahawk missiles at us, it's just an act of terrorism. So they have canceled what Putin recently said, which is that countries that give the Tomahawks to Ukraine and provide the necessary targeting information are considered by Russia as co-belligerents and will be subject to Russian attack. Well, yesterday the foreign ministry said, well, actually, these aren't attacks. These are acts of terrorism. So when Putin and the foreign ministry and the Kremlin create the impression that there are no red lines, that anything the West does will be ignored or declared something other than an act of war, it encourages these provocations, and it makes the West think, it makes the people in Washington think. And of course, you got to remember they're already overflowing with hubris and arrogance and hegemony. And Putin reinforces those beliefs by his refusal to acknowledge that Russia is under attack. So that's the reason it happens, Rashid. I think, you and I know that we would not fare well in a war with Russia, any kind of war, not a conventional war, not a nuclear war. But the people in Washington don't know that. They think that Russia is not really that much of an adversary. And Putin, as I've said, has given them that impression. And he's never done anything to make them realize that messing with Russia is dangerous. So I think, my position from the beginning, from the first opening days of the conflict in February of 2022, my position has been that Putin had made a strategic blunder that would cause the war to ever widen.
Mm-hmm.
And it would get wider and wider, and sooner or later spiral out of control. And so it is now spiraling out of control, but Putin simply won't acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be that that's the Russian plan. They just won't acknowledge that the West is at war with them. And by declaring whatever we do an act of terrorism, not an act of war. So, at some point, if Putin continues like this, they'll be in a corner. The back will be at the wall. No possibility of any more denial. And that's when the proverbial hits the fan. So Putin's way of conducting this conflict, he made this decision in order to avoid a wider war. But the way he has conducted the war guarantees a wider war.
Mm-hmm.
So the wider war awaits. And at some point, I guess this realization will dawn on the Kremlin.
But do you think, because we know America's action, the more you give her, especially in these latest presidents that have come to office, the more that you give her, the more she takes, and the more Russia allows these things to happen, the more provocations will happen, and as you said, Russia will be pushed into a corner. I want to ask you, Dr. Roberts, because I hear a lot of pundits and I hear a lot of channels talking about how um, Vladimir Putin is trying to prevent the war from spreading. Why is the onus always on the victim to prevent escalation? I cannot fathom that that all of the onus is on Russia as Russia is being attacked, sabotaged, sanctioned, terrorism across the board, and we know that these tax on its oil and electrical systems are being done not by Ukraine but by NATO itself, and we know that Russia knows that. So why are pundits and hosts of platforms putting all of the onus on Russia not to respond in kind?
Well, Putin invited it by never responding. And it's a way for the West to cover up the fact that the West, is the aggressor. Because the aggressor is Putin if he doesn't do what is necessary to end the war, prevent it from spreading, and so on. And so Putin has complied with this. He brought it on himself. And it's now institutionalized, it's established. So how does he get out of it? How can he get out of this role that he put himself in, and he's been in for so long that he now bears the onus for the entirety of the conflict? It's all his fault. Well, that serves Washington, because as long as Putin agrees that Washington is not behaving aggressively, then the definition of aggressive is Putin's failure to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the position Putin has put himself in. He's responsible for the aggression because he hasn't surrendered.
It is beyond belief. But do you think he is behind closed doors? His generals and the advisors are getting fed up, because there was a poll that saying they support him as the president, but people are getting fed up that the war continues to go on, and that Russia needs to nip it in the bud, and also that Russia needs to slap the West in the face with an arresting moment. And I brought this up on a previous show, that I asked former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, because he had just come from Russia and he had just talked to a lot of Russian people, and I asked him, well, if the United States supplies the Tomahawks, whether they're obsolete or whatever, it still is a strategic weapon, and it still is going past the red line of Russia, which would have cost a nuclear exchange 10, 20 years ago. But I asked him, if they supply those weapons, knowing that U.S. has to operate them and guide them, what do you believe would happen? And he said there would be an arresting moment, meaning that Russia would strike NATO facilities with the arresting. And I asked him, I said, but I'm not talking about just in Ukraine. And he said that he believed that that Russia would strike outside of you, maybe in one of the surrounding NATO facilities in surrounding nations. What do you think about that?
Well, one would have expected that, except for what I reported to you. The Russian Foreign Ministry has said the use of tomahawks against Russia is not an act of war, it's an act of terrorism. And that the purpose of using tomahawks against Russia is to further widen the conflict. And so it shows that Russia isn't going to take any action, because if they do, then the United States will have succeeded in further widening the conflict. And of course, Russia will be blamed for it, because that's the position, as we've discussed this morning, that Putin has allowed Russia to be put in. So I don't think they'll do anything, because yesterday the foreign ministry said that the use of the tomahawks would be terrorism. Well, terrorism is not an act of war, and it's not covered by Russian strategic doctrine requiring a Russian military response. So as long as they can, as long as they're willing, the Russians are willing to define attacks on themselves, not as war, but as terrorism, they won't do anything. And they seem determined not to do anything by declaring acts of war as acts of terrorism that don't fall under their war doctrine. So this is a situation. It's dangerous because it encourages more and worse provocations. Now, Gilbert Doctorow and I think also John Hilmer recently have reported that there is a growing opposition in Russia to Putin's conduct of the conflict, and that there is a push, or at least there's talk, on the widely watched TV programs about the necessity of Russia quickly ending the war. No more of this fighting with arms tied behind us, that we have to finally, after 4 years, do something about making it impossible for Kiev to continue the war. You see, this whole 4 years, Russia has done nothing to make it impossible for Kiev to continue the war. They've never attacked the government in Kiev. They've never shut down the Ukrainian ability to conduct war. They try to confine the war to the battlefield. Now they can't, because they have to attack deeper to try to disrupt energy and rail supplies and so on. But the Russians have never blocked or cut off the rail lines, bringing in weapons, from Poland or from Western Ukraine. They've never taken the actions that a military at war would take to prevent the delivery of weapons to the front. They wait till the weapons get to the front, then they destroy them. Well, they don't do anything to stop the flow. And they've done nothing to shut down the ability of Ukraine to continue the war. They've nothing at all. And so there is now, according to Doctorow and I think Hilmer, and they watch these things closer than I'm able to. And Doctorow goes out of his way to try to watch all the main TV programs where foreign affairs and the war are discussed by Russian experts and commentators. And they are reporting, well, okay, we're now seeing dissatisfaction with the unwillingness of Putin to bring the war to an end. And that unwillingness, in my view, as I've emphasized, is that if he takes decisive actions to bring the war to an end, he thinks it will alarm the West and lead to a wider war. And he doesn't understand that by not alarming the West, that it's dangerous to mess with Russia. That's what's leading to the wider war. So Putin reads it backwards. And he seems to be trapped in this mistaken way of looking at the conflict. And that's why I think the provocations will increase. And if he never does anything, I think he does risk being moved aside. Because at some point, the humiliations for Russia just become too great. And they lead to further and worse provocations. I mean, what would Putin do if Tomahawk hits the Kremlin? Would he say it's not an act of war? It's so. Well, what else is there to say?
Yeah, even remember a while ago, a drone hit the Kremlin, close to the office of the of Vladimir Putin, and we know that was a drone given by the West. Now, this is what I've taken a lot of heat for this, because I have been saying for the longest that I would issue a direct statement to the West, and I would say from this point on, and I've been saying this since the war started, from this point on, that Russia will interdict any weapons being brought across into Ukraine's border to fight this war with us. And I said that I would tell the West that if we would not strike only in Ukraine, but we would strike on the nation that is bringing the weapons in, and follow that up if they continue to do so, because I don't think that some of the people that are not from the West understands that the empire will keep going, and if they see any signs of weakness or any flinching or any shaking, they'll escalate and continue to escalate. Even when they have a bad hand, they will shape the narrative as you being the aggressor, and they will continue on as we see right now. What do you say about that, Doctor Paul?
Well, I agree with you. That's my position too. That's been my position for 4 years. And in fact, Rashid, Putin made that exact statement. He told the West exactly what you say he should have done. But they went ahead and did it, and he didn't do anything. So the red line really wasn't there. When you declare red lines and don't enforce them, you lose all credibility. And so the provocations get worse. So it's not that Putin didn't do what you recommended. He did do it. He just didn't enforce it. It didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And none of the red lines that he's set out have meant anything. And as we've already discussed this morning, he won't even acknowledge an attack on the Russian strategic bombing force. Oh, that's not an act of war. If it was an act of war, I'd have to do something about it, and I don't want to. So it's a terrorism. It was just terrorism. And that's what the Foreign Office yesterday said about the Tomahawks. Oh, if they use them against us, it's not an act of war, it's just terrorism. We don't have to do anything, it's terrorism. So if there was any constraint at all on Trump about sending those Tomahawks, the statement yesterday by the Russian Foreign Ministry has removed any restraint, because the Russians have declared, yeah, you can fire them at us, we won't acknowledge it. Well, I mean, I think I may have posted something about that today. I wrote an article about that this morning. I think I did.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. So if we see, I mean, this is mindlessness. This is mindlessness on the part of Putin. And I understand he does it because he realizes that a war with the West will be nuclear and the damage will be horrendous for everybody. And what is the point of it? So he wants to avoid it at all costs. That's probably a good decision, you know. But on the other hand, his avoidance of the war is causing the expansion of the war that he doesn't want.
Mhm.
And so it gets harder and harder to put a foot down hard at this point. He could have done it very easily early on, or he could have avoided the whole thing simply by knocking out Ukraine instantly.
Mhm.
It's easy for Russia to prevent Ukraine from being able to continue the war. It's very easy. Instead, Putin has avoided that and has focused the conflict on a kilometer by kilometer clearance of little villages. Well, this maximizes casualties,
Mhm.
and it's a pointless. Of course, it's succeeding, uh, uh, but it's a pointless way, and it's dangerous because the longer it goes on, the more involved the West gets, and it gets more uh, lost in unreality, in fantasy, like I said earlier in this conversation today with you. The the NATO Secretary General dismissing Russia as a military force. It's not even comparable to NATO, he said. Um, no aspect of it is comparable. And they don't even have trained fighter pilots. And they're no match for us. Well, this is what the NATO Secretary General told the meeting of European defense ministers. I think it was yesterday or the day before. And the same day, Trump came out demeaning Russian military capability. So the West regards Russia as an insubstantial enemy militarily, and that's Putin's fault.
Do you believe that this big talk by NATO could be because they understand that if Russia were to escalate, that they have no way of defeating Russia militarily? Because if we look at the situation, Russia has destroyed the highly trained and most armed forces outside of U.S. forces 4 times, which is the Ukrainian army. I remember them saying at the beginning of the war that Ukrainian army was the most trained, the best trained, and the most armed outside of the U.S. And now Russia has destroyed that army, going on this 4th time. And Russia has demonstrated new military capabilities that the U.S. has not even had, does not even have at this moment. Could you believe that's bluster from the empire to try to cower Russia, or to try to make Russia think, okay, if you respond to our escalation, then there is no way you can defeat us on the battlefield, when they really have people who understand in the background that militarily, especially in Europe, that they cannot compete with Russia on the European battlefield?
Well, no, I don't think that. I don't think that's so. I think what the NATO Secretary General was doing was preparing the European country's defense ministers for the coming war against Russia. You know, we've had the German chancellor say that Germany is preparing for war with Russia in a few years. We've had the British government say we're preparing for war with Russia. The Polish government, we're preparing for war with Russia. So I think it was just a meeting to rah-rah. Let's get on with the preparation so that all the European countries are prepared for this war. And I don't think they believe Russia will use any nuclear weapons or even the Oreshnik conventional weapon. And I think that they understand that Russia is capable as it is, cannot conduct a war on its frontier ranging from the Baltic all the way through Poland, Ukraine, Romania, Moldova, all the way into Georgia. You know, just last week we tried again to overthrow the Georgian government. It was a coup attempt, according to the Georgian government. They said the European intelligence services were in here using political opponents financed by American NGOs. They attempted a coup. So, and we'll continue to attempt a coup until we succeed. And then we'll use Georgia to open another front.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about, I don't know what the length is, but it's at least a couple of 1,000 kilometers. Now, you can't fight a ground war on that basis. I mean, it would take the entire Russian army with conscription, and they'd have to borrow the entire Chinese army. You know, and there's just it's too much. And if anything, that would force the Russians to use Oreshniks or nuclear weapons. And I wrote not long ago that the West is mistaken to overlook that fact, that if they have such a wide, long front with Russia, the Russians can't defend. You know, it's a huge country. They can't defend all the borders conventionally at the same time, and so it would lead directly to nuclear war. And we shouldn't forget, Rashid, that the Russian nuclear capability is substantially greater than ours. Their ICBMs are supersonic. Some of them travel at Mach 10. And they randomly change the trajectory in flight. So you can't intercept them. You don't know where they're going to be in a second. and they're extremely powerful. It only takes a few. I mean, I think 6 of them would probably exterminate Europe and England. And 6 would probably take us out. It doesn't take many. And then they have this underwater torpedo it's a nuclear weapon fired by submarines off our coast. And they travel through the water, and the explosion of them creates massive tsunamis that would flood the entire east coast of the United States. And according to reports I read, Florida, the entirety of Florida would be underwater. Well, what can you do about these weapons. Why invite an attack that can't be resisted? But that's what we intend on doing, it seems. Sooner or later, the Russians will have to act or surrender. Putin might prefer to surrender, but I don't think the Russian military will let him. And also, Rashid, we have to remember that dating from the Soviet period, the Russians have this, what do they call it? The dead hand system of launching nuclear weapons. So it doesn't, even if we wipe out the whole command and control center, these weapons still launch. They don't need anybody. And in that case, we can't even win with a first strike, an unanticipated first strike. We can't even win because of this dead hand system. Now we might want to say, well, that was a myth, or it probably wouldn't really work, but I don't think we should take chances, regardless of what the chance is. If the outcome is we're going to get wiped out, what is the gain of that? And when you look at all of this, Rashid, what is it all about? What are the Russians doing to us? Nothing. What are the Chinese doing to us? Nothing. What are the Iranians doing to us? Nothing. All the provocations come from us to them. What little they do is a response to our provocations. China didn't provoke us by cutting off rare earths. They did that in response to all of Trump's provocations. They finally had to do something. So it's this whole picture that's been created in the West, in the United States, and Canada, and Australia, of a Russian enemy, a Chinese enemy, an Iranian enemy. Oh, we've got to get them over there before they're over here. This is nonsense. There's no such enemy. None of them have war plans for attacking us, except in response to our attack on them. They don't have the doctrine of hegemony over the world. Oh, we've got to suppress the Americans so that they don't interfere with our hegemony. Nobody declares that but Washington. So this whole thing is a production of the American Zionist neoconservative doctrine of American hegemony. And that's what this is about. Russia and China can serve as constraints on American unilateralism, and we won't accept that. And so, or the neoconservatives won't accept that. So we have to somehow diminish, defeat Russia and China so they can't interfere with American unilateralism. This is all this war is about. It's not about anything else. Nothing at all, but the doctrine of a double handful of Zionists, neoconservatives, the Wolfowitz doctrine. Principal goal of American foreign policy is to prevent the rise of any country that could serve as a restraint on American unilateralism. No president, certainly not even Trump, has repudiated this doctrine. It's still American foreign policy. And that is the sole reason for the conflicts.
And Mr. Roberts, what you said, if we follow that up and we see that America is she's setting fires all across the globe, to try to maintain her hegemony. And I'm not doing the Chinese justice by this, because they had a beautiful statement that when you see a person starting fires outside your house, the best way to stop it is to start a few fires outside their house, so they'll have to deal with that. Why has Russia allowed America and NATO to strategically eliminate all of its trading partners and all of its allies, like Syria, like Iraq, like Lebanon, Libya, and all of this stuff, without putting more and even right now, as we talked about, the color revolution in Georgia, what they're doing in Moldova, what they have done in Ukraine, and what they're trying to do in Armenia and Azerbaijan. Why? Because if they continue to allow this to happen, they expend more time, more money, more people, more efforts, instead of nipping it in the bud before it takes legs and walk.
Yeah, and Venezuela.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think we've been talking about that all morning, Rashid, and I think the reason is Putin believes if they take any decisive action anywhere, it confirms the Western propaganda that they're out to rebuild the Soviet empire, and that this will give a more convincing belief to the European countries and to Washington that they have to prepare for a war against the coming Russian aggression. So I think that's the way. Plus, I think this is reinforced by the professor intellectual class in Russia that really wants to be part of the Western system, and so doesn't want to do anything that alienates the West. And I think this influence is declining in Russia. But at the beginning of the conflict in Iran, it was still quite strong. And I think it put in place an attitude that prevails, that if we're very decisive, it'll alarm the Americans and the Europeans, and it'll make it more difficult to reach an agreement. I don't think there's any possibility of an agreement. This was made clear between December of 2021 and February of 2022, prior to the Russian intervention in Donbass. It was made clear what we had for a couple of months, massive efforts made by Putin and the Foreign Minister Lavrov, massive efforts with the Biden regime, with the EU, the European Union, and with NATO, begging for a mutual security agreement. They got the cold shoulder all across the board. No. Well, if you won't give a country a mutual security agreement, that means security for them, but also for you.
Mm-hmm.
Then clearly your intention toward them is war.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been made clear. You may remember Blinken, the Biden Secretary of State. He was absolutely firm, refused face to face with Putin any kind of accommodation of Russian security interests. Well, if that's the situation, sooner or later it's war. There's no other way. And so when I see practically every day another statement by Putin and Lavrov, oh, we're hoping for negotiations. We're willing to talk to Ukraine. We're willing to talk to the Americans. We're ready for a negotiation. When I see this, I say, why don't these people shut up? They're just making the situation worse for themselves. It's almost like they're on their knees begging, and nobody's going to pay any attention to them. already that no, their threats are meaningless. No one pays any attention. We've had 4 years of declared red lines never enforced. And now, as we've talked about all morning, they won't even acknowledge acts of war against them, the Russians. They won't even acknowledge an attack on strategic bombers was an act of war. Oh, no, it was an act of terrorism. We didn't have to do anything. And now, yesterday, the foreign ministry says, well, these tomahawks, if they fire them at us, that's just terrorism. So that encourages war. And for some reason, Putin can't understand that. And I don't know why. It's certainly not avoiding war. It's encouraging it.
And Dr. Roberts, don't forget that prior to striking Russia's strategic bombers and their second strike capability, that the United States and NATO struck their forward radars, their early warning radars also.
Yeah, that's right, Rashid, you're right. So we've had a conflict that Putin has not tried to win. He's permitted it to go on 4 years, and consequently, the West has gotten more and more involved, each step being a little more provocative than the previous, and there's no response. And so the question is, what's next? And possibly people in Russia that are decision makers will decide that this isn't working and that they can't tolerate any longer, and that the only real solution is to quickly knock Ukraine out of the conflict before it can go any wider. And that is a much better alternative than sitting there accepting acts of war and denying them. No, it didn't really happen. So I don't know. We'll see. I kind of stick to my long time prediction that the failure to end this war means it will spiral out of control and there'll be a huge war. And it'll all come from Putin trying to avoid war. The attempt to avoid war is going to provoke a very large war. And it's a strategic blunder that the whole world will suffer for.
And Dr. Roberts, I know the time is short, but my take on it is this. Even right now, if Russia moves to end the war in Ukraine, and they go full blast, I still believe that they have to send a signal to the West, because the West has already said that they are so invested in this that I believe that they may have to strike outside of Ukraine to let the West know, because you see how things are going right now, and especially how Zelensky now has taken over Odessa through military dictatorship there, because he knows that is strategic. And those were on orders of NATO. A lot of people don't know this because the French and the British have been trying to isolate Odessa so that they can bring troops in to try to defend Odessa from Russia, because they understand that if Odessa goes, the utility of Ukraine is lost, because there's no opening to the Black Sea, and Russia would have all of the areas, industrialized areas of Ukraine, and the money-making areas, and the silk, the coal plants, everything from Odessa to the Donbass. I believe that the only way that this could stop is not just pounding the Ukrainian armed forces, because remember that they're the puppets. You have to hit the puppeteers to stop the legs and the arms from moving and dancing the puppet. So I believe that Russia would have to do something outside of what they have been doing to end this war, and it has to do with more than just Ukraine.
Well, Rashid, I understand that that point of view, and there's a lot in it. Though I do think that Russia has the capability of making it impossible for Ukraine to continue the war
Mhm.
without having to strike outside Ukraine.
Mhm.
All they have to do is to destroy the government's capabilities in Kiev of conducting war, and they can very easily destroy the rail lines, bringing in weapons or moving troops. They can do this, and they can do that without striking Germany, for example. So, yeah, that would be the the best solution. It should have been done 4 years ago, and none of this would ever have transpired. And I think it would still work if they prevent Kiev from being able to fight. They can do that. They haven't done it. It doesn't take much to do it. They can cut off the entirety of Western Ukraine from the West. They can simply stop the ability of any energy transmission, any communication, any rail line traffic, any road traffic. They can halt it all. And it can be done quickly and easily. And they have refused this. It doesn't require troops or for them to occupy all of Ukraine. And they've chosen not to do this, I think, because they believe it confirms the propaganda that they're rebuilding the Soviet empire. And that once the West can wave that flag, then the war just will get bigger. I don't think so. I think if the war is finished decisively, everyone says, well, look, that's what will happen to us. They're not going to tolerate. Putin said years ago that Russia would never again fight a war on her own territory. That's precisely what Russia is doing.
Mhm. Mhm.
So Russia needs to end the war this week, not by a peace negotiation, which is meaningless unless Russia surrenders and accepts Zelensky's terms, Trump's terms. The only option Russia has is to win militarily, decisively, immediately. I think that's the only thing that has any chance of stopping the movement toward a much wider war that in the end will be nuclear. And why the Russian government can't realize that, I just don't know. I can understand, as I've said several times today, they're reading it backwards and think decisive action causes war, when in fact it's the absence of decisive action that's causing war. And if they wait much longer, the only decisive action they'll have will be a general attack on the West.
Mhm. So, in closing, Dr. Roberts, this is this is like one question, but it's three or four rolled up into one. Will we have war on Venezuela in the next few weeks to months because of all of the naval buildup? Would war with Iran come in the next few months? And will Russia up the ante and end this war in Ukraine?
Well, Rashid, I don't know. The reports are that Maduro in Venezuela had offered all kinds of concessions to Trump. He offered them a share in the oil company and all sorts of things, trying to avoid his overthrow. I just don't know. Washington may prefer to overthrow him as a lesson to others. And also, of course, if Washington overthrows him, it shows that the strategic arrangement Venezuela had with Russia didn't mean anything. Now, I don't know that arrangement really covers any sort of military support, but clearly the Russians aren't going to do anything to help Maduro. And so the effect is to weaken BRICS, because everybody says, well, look, the Russians, they never do anything, so how are we safe? I mean, BRICS really is based on the military capability of Russia and China. And if it's ineffectual, then members of BRICS will think twice about being members. Already Trump, yesterday it was, I think, Trump said, BRICS is already falling apart.
Mhm.
Well, he means the Russians don't ever do anything, and so what are these people rallying around Russia for? I mean, this was a Russian idea, BRICS. And so that's the reason we might like to overthrow. I mean, Maduro, I think it's at the point Maduro could offer us the entire country. We still, when I say we, I mean Washington, still would decide to overthrow him as a lesson and as a way of breaking up BRICS.
Well, and let me interject real quick on what you said. Just yesterday, Donald Trump said that he gave authorization to the CIA for covert operations in Venezuela. So that is more weight to what you just said about even if he offered them the country now as a lesson to the rest of the world, the United States may continue on doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I think Maduro and Venezuela, they're set up to be overthrown. That was the reason the Nobel Peace Prize was given to the woman in Venezuela who's an opponent of Maduro. When you give her the Peace Prize, then that is a way of acknowledging that the opponents in Venezuela are the good people. And so we already have the new president. It was the woman who received this. She's clearly an American operative. And this prize was given in order to anoint her as Venezuela's next president. Now, how will they go about overthrowing Maduro? Most likely, they'll pay huge sums of money to the generals and officers and any important people, important economically people. So they'll simply bribe the people to abandon Maduro. And so he won't be able to resist. I read that Colombia, which used to be in our pocket, apparently is now saying they would help Maduro fight an invasion. So he even has an ally. And of course, Colombia and Venezuela are still heavily forested. I think their rainforests are there. And our capability of dealing with guerrillas forests is very low, as we learned in Vietnam. So if the Vietnamese can defeat us, I think the Venezuelans and the Colombians could as well. But I suspect we simply give bags full of money to the people in control of the Ukrainian military. and then they just tell Maduro he's under arrest or he has to go or whatever. And so I do think it's gone so far. The plot is unfolded, and we have a successor president already anointed. As for your question about are we going to be at war with Iran, that's Netanyahu's choice. If he decides that America is going to go fight Iran for him, then we will. It's up to Netanyahu. It's not up to Trump. And Netanyahu may decide, well, I've got Trump so much in my pocket already. Let's don't push it any further right now. I just don't know what he'll decide. So what we do see is that between the Israeli use of America against Muslims, we've already destroyed 5 or 6 Arab states for them. Between that aggression and between the American Zionist foreign policy of we can't tolerate any country that can constrain our unilateralism, our own aggression, what's the antidote to these 2 aggressions? I don't see one. So I would think aggression remains the main operative force in the world at this time, and will for as far as one can see. So all the talk about peace and all this is, the Nobel Peace Prize was Christian. It's now called a Nordic War Prize. And that's what it is. And it shows not even the Nobel Peace Prize Committee is independent of Washington. They have to give it to somebody that serves our foreign policy. And in this case, it helps to overthrow Maduro. And even though he's offered to give back the oil company, which his predecessor nationalized for the Ukrainian people, he's offered to give it back to the Americans. So there you have it, Rashid. It's a pleasure to talk to you. You're very well informed and you ask good questions, and I hope your audience appreciates you.
Thank you.
And I would like to have, if there is a URL of this program, if you post it around places that don't immediately take it down, please send me a URL.
I'll do it right after the show. Right after the
I'd
show.
like to post it myself. And as I say, I hope your audience appreciates you. And I congratulate you and thank you for your courage, because you're going against very dangerous people.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Roberts. And you're welcome on the show anytime. And I just want to take the time out to thank you for giving us an hour plus of your time, because you're a busy man, and I know that you are. And we really, really appreciate you.
Well, I'm busy trying to get the truth out, and that's what you help do. So you don't have to make any apologies to using my time. This is what my time's supposed to be for. Okay, Rashid, all the best to you.
You too, and I'll talk to you later, and I'll send you the link right after the show, Mr. Roberts.
Thanks very much.
All right. Everybody, I want to say this in closing. As I always say, do right by others, not because there's some material gain or because there's some accolades behind it. Do right by others because it's the right the humane and the godly thing to do. Because remember, even when no one else is watching you, God Almighty is watching you. And as my late mother used to always say, God sits high, but he looks low. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. Thank you for joining me. We're out of here. Peace.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment.